Absence makes the heart grow fonder, or so it is said, but does anybody really miss beaver cleavage? However, we can all agree that one of the most exciting things about professional wrestling is watching one of your favorites return after years of being away. But sadly, not everyone can have a brilliant return like Shawn Michaels, who did some of his best work after missing out on years of in-ring service. And not many can come back and be more popular than ever like Brock Lesnar or The Rock. Some wrestlers come back and you just kinda wish they hadn't. You want to remember them how they were and not with those 50 extra pounds and diminished in-ring skills. But sometimes we just have to take what we can get. Well, I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and here are 10 terrible wrestling returns that should have been great. Number 10, Roddy Piper in 2003. Piper is one of the greatest heels of all time, but his work after the 80s was pretty forgettable. However, one last run in the WWE in 2003 in any form could have been a great way to cap off his career. Unfortunately, the hot rod crashed. At Mania 19, in a match between Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan, Piper made his triumphant, though incredibly random return. He soon took on the role of a manager and went to war against Hogan, who ridiculously was Mr. America. It was awful from every conceivable angle. Instead of a chewing bubblegum and kicking ass they live type return for Piper, it was more like Hell Comes to Frogtown on VHS. His once brilliant promos lost their bite, and just to be nice, he was a touch out of shape, we'll say. Piper's last big WWE singles match was losing to Mr. America at Judgment Day in something that was somehow worse than their Halloween Havoc Age in a Cage Classic, because that was 6 years earlier. The legend did show up a few more times throughout the years, but he never did come close to recapturing that incredible magic he once had. Number 9, Jake the Snake Roberts in 1996. After being away from the company for nearly 4 years, Roberts returned in 1996 to the WWF. While he was older, though at 41 he really wasn't that old, he was ridiculously out of shape, but still he had his great diabolical character, right? Actually, no, he didn't have that either. Roberts returned by trading in his dark and creepy act for a born-again preacher. Wait, what? He did become part of history though, but it was because of putting Steve Austin over in the King of the Ring tournament, and then subsequently being mocked for his beliefs and for being so ineffective in the ring. This largely forgettable run, minus that one big moment of course, was far beneath the legend. He lasted a little over a year before being released, never to wrestle for the company again. Number 8, Trish Stratus in 2011. Trish took a backseat to Snooki. That pretty much says it all. In 2006, Stratus effectively called it a career after a match against Lita at Unforgiven. The next couple years, she took part in 3 tag matches, which are basically one-offs. But in 2011, she returned once more for a WrestleMania match. But her return was a bit of a failure, in part due to being overshadowed by the returning Rock and, Snooki. To top it all off, the match may be most well remembered for John Morrison refusing to hug her after the win because his girlfriend Melina was upset about Trish's inclusion at the show and not a full-time woman wrestler like, maybe herself. Soon after, Trish left the company again, and fans were left without much satisfaction as the former women's champion had one forgettable return. Number 7, The Ultimate Warrior in 1996. The WWF was in a transitional period in 96. It was a time with a roster full of talented stars who just weren't quite over yet. To create a buzz, Warrior was brought back in from parts unknown to work with this new era and potentially give them a rub. This, of course, was all in theory, because in execution, it was a colossal failure that absolutely nobody benefited from, except maybe Warrior's bank account. Warrior just didn't seem to fit in this new era. Unlike his contemporaries in Hogan and The Undertaker, who were about to shake up their characters to fit the times, Warrior was largely the same, and it was largely goofy. Fans wanted attitude, not long, rambling promos filled with made-up words. Distressicity? Distressicity. Warrior stuck around for 3 months before doing what he always did. Pissed off his boss. He had a quick Mania match, he put over nobody, and then he disappeared right back into parts unknown again. Still, that return made his time in WCW look like an absolute masterpiece. Number 6, the Dudley Boyz in 2015. Bubba Ray and Devon's return to the WWE after a decade away was so lame, you just wanted to put yourself through a flaming table. Together, the two formed one of the greatest tag teams of all time, but their WWE return was about as exciting as High Voltage getting back together. I think Kenny Chaos is due for another run. After a few fun weeks, management just didn't know what to do with them, so we went back in time for approximately the 700th and 43rd ECW reunion with Dreamin' and Rhino to battle the Wyatt family. It was a 1-year deal that gave us approximately 0 interesting moments. Even the heat that Gallows and Anderson got on them by beating them up on their way out was soon done away with because of that old day skit. Sometimes it's best to wonder what might have been, than to just have seen the Dudleys as the modern day Ascension, if that analogy makes any sense at all. Number 5, Ricky Steamboat in 1991. 1 year after putting on one of the all-time greatest matches ever at WrestleMania 3, Ricky Steamboat left the company and headed to WCW to put on some more all-time great classics against Ric Flair. In 1991, he came back to the WWF. Actually, Kind of. He wasn't really Steamboat anymore, he was just the Dragon. For the most part, the announcers didn't even acknowledge that this was the same guy we had just seen a couple of years ago. He was no longer a hardworking family man either, he was now a silly gimmick with a ridiculous looking cape. Oh yeah, and he could now breathe fire. He only had one pay-per-view match during his return, and he never had an opportunity at a title. He could have been pushed as the second biggest babyface in the company after Hogan, but he was largely forgotten for his entire run there. The Dragon flamed out in the WWF, and in a year he went right on back to WCW. Number 4, Alberto Del Rio in 2015. Del Rio was sick of his lack of a push in WWE, and after a racially charged backstage incident, he went to Lucha Underground and Ring of Honor to revitalize his career. WWE was in desperate need of star power though, and surprisingly brought him back into the fold. His return was doomed from the start. Instead of being the great Playboy character again, he was doing material as bad as that time him and Ricardo Rodriguez did entire skits on how Mexican food gives Americans diarrhea. He was paired with Zeb Coulter to form Mex America, whose master plan was to bring the people of Mexico and America together. That sounds pretty nice, but in Vince McMahon's eyes, that made them heels. Then he became the 4th most important member of League of Nations and became one of the highest paid jobbers in the history of the company. In 1 year, Del Rio had had enough again. He took off, and for his sake and his sanity, let's hope he doesn't return and can unite people of the world elsewhere. Number 3, Bret Hart in 2010. The best there is, the best there was, had one of the most mediocre returns there ever will be. Hart left the WWF in November of 1997 after the Montreal Screwjob and didn't make an appearance on Raw until 2010. There was a lot of serious, real-life heat between the Hitman and Shawn Michaels, who was still wrestling at the time, so there was a natural built-in angle between them, but WWE thought that a hug between the two was the way to go. Now, Hart couldn't wrestle, but he could have managed a new Hart Foundation into war against the aging and incredibly lame D-Generation X. Hart, I guess, did technically wrestle Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26, and by wrestling, I mean he hit him with a chair for like half an hour. Now, he still shows up now and then basically to say hi, but he doesn't really do anything of consequence. So basically, a huge angle 13 years in the making was effectively, excellently executed in one night. Number 2, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall in 2002. Together, Hall and Nash made wrestling cool to watch again when they left the WWF for WCW in 1996. After WCW folded in 2001, a WWE homecoming sounded pretty awesome, but it seemed like wishful thinking. Well, the wish did come true, but it was far from awesome. In fact, it was like a wrestling nightmare. After the initial excitement of the reunited NWO wore off, the group crumbled. Hogan left the group at WrestleMania, Nash was soon injured, and Hall's only other pay-per-view match was against Bradshaw, and then he was fired. All those dream matches gone, all those mountains of cash to be made had just disappeared. Nash actually had another terrible return in him 9 years later when he was inserted into the CM Punk, Triple H, Who Called My Cell Phone storyline. Hall, though, never wrestled for the company again, and if it wasn't for Hogan's classic match with The Rock at Mania 18, he would definitely be joining his brothers on this list. And the most terrible wrestling return belongs to Batista in 2013. Batista's last run can be summed up in exactly one word: Blue-tista. Like The Rock, Batista left the wrestling business to head off to Hollywood, but unlike The Rock, when Batista came back, it was pretty terrible. The animal was maybe half the size he was when we last saw him, and that's if we're being generous. He was also dressed in uncomfortably tight clothes, and then he hugged the biggest heels in the company with the authority. In one segment, Batista's long-awaited new return was dead. Fans saw the former World Heavyweight Champion as a relic of the past and not someone they were willing to accept as a top star in the company anymore. They caught on to the fact that he was destined to win the Royal Rumble, and then their reaction to him became increasingly hostile. Plans for Randy Orton versus Batista main eventing Mania had to be scrapped, and Daniel Bryan was inserted into the role just so everyone would chill the f*** out. After that, all we can remember are those beautiful blue sleeves. We should probably feel really bad about that if it wasn't so funny. Well, that's all for the list. Got any other terrible returns? Sound off below. I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and you can follow me at Andrew Socek on Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more great content.